Hello everybody, I'm Justin from Playing Board Games, and I'm joined by Daniel today to talk to you about how to read an investigator card. Daniel, how's it going? Is it going good by chance?
Yeah, I think it is. It's maybe even going to be going better after we chat about Arkham, my favorite game, and probably yours too, right?
Yeah, probably. It's up there. It rotates, but it's in the top 5 for sure.
Well, it better be, because that's what we talk about all day.
So this is the first part of a series that we're going to dive a little bit deeper. I'll kind of explain it here. When you're just starting out, Arkham Horror can be a very daunting game to learn. And welcome to the first episode of the How To series, a series of videos designed to break down the various parts of Arkham Horror and give you a better understanding of how to play, how to get better, and ultimately how to feel confident in making decisions in this great game. If you are an enfranchised player and you're watching this video anyway, thank you for your support. It means so much to me. But this is going to be a very basic, bare bones analysis of these cards in a way that is completely obvious to you. But if you want to still watch, I'd appreciate the support. But if you're a new player and you actually don't know anything about this game, this is the video for you. We're going to talk about the investigator cards in great detail. We're going to break down an investigator card and discuss how to read it and what all these numbers mean. So, first off, here is an investigator card. This is Daniela Reyes. As you can see, when you look at it right now, there's a lot of stuff going on in this card. So what we're going to do is we're going to break this down piecemeal and look at it aspect by aspect. We're going to talk about what those aspects are, and then we're going to come back and we're going to look at Daniela as a whole and tell you what these numbers, what all these numbers and words mean, looking at them individually. So let's start by keeping it simple. The name and subtitle, as well as the class. So, Daniel, I'll throw this one to you because I feel like I've been yapping a bit much. What does the class mean on the investigator card?
Well, your investigator card is a card, so cards tend to have a class or they're neutral. And basically for Daniela, this means that most of her cards are going to be Guardian. She's Guardian, and that's kind of a direction you can take her in. She actually has some other access to cards that we'll talk about later, but, you know, kind of the identity of her is Guardian. So there you go.
Yeah, and there are 5 classes in the game: Guardian, Seeker, Rogue, Mystic, Survivor, but they're kind of just a designator to kind of show what their strengths and weaknesses are, and something you don't need to really understand too much. The rulebook does have a breakdown of the classes, what you can expect, and Daniel and I actually just did a video on his channel talking about that. That should be live by the time that this video goes up. And that's kind of just, again, the identity of the card and all of that sort of thing. The name is the name. A note there is the little star next to her name. That is the unique symbol. This means that there cannot be 2 or more unique cards. There can only be one. There's only one Daniela Reyes. So if you are playing Daniela Reyes and another friend of yours also has a core set, they cannot play Daniela Reyes by the official rules of the game. The subtitle is kind of like what is just generally referred to as, like, is there an actual like name for that? I tried to look it up. Right? Subtitle? Perfect. I'm a genius, yeah. But by chance. So this is just kind of like a designator to show, like, this is like her flavor. She's the mechanic. So like if she didn't have art, you could like paint a picture from that. But luckily she does have art, which is just below it. But yeah, this is kind of used most often to just like give additional flavor for these characters. And we sometimes see them on player cards as well. All right. That's the easy stuff. Let's start getting into the more interesting things, starting with the stat line. So, we have 4 stats here, and I'm going to say them in their proper names and then the PBG names just to give some further context. Luckily, the PBG names are very simple in comparison to the real names. So, first, she has 3 willpower. We're not going to talk about what this means for Daniela yet, but we're going to talk about the stats. So, she has 3 willpower, or 3 brain, 2 intellect, or 2 book, 5 combat, or 5 fist, 2 agility, or 2 foot. Daniel, what does this kind of like show, like, what for new players? What do these numbers mean generally?
So these are your base stats. You come with some stats and you take skill tests, and these are the numbers that you start with. They can be increased with other stuff in play. They can be decreased with potentially some other stuff like treacheries. But generally, this is what you want to focus on and saying, hey, what am I good at? What am I not as good at? The top end is usually 5. You don't get investigators that have a 6 in any of these numbers. So when I look at Daniela, and she's got a 5, that's really, really good compared to every other investigator in the game at combat. So that means fighting using events or weapons. We're going to see some assets and probably talk about in a second, and also just your basic action. That's a fight test. It's going to use that number as your base value for the skill. You can increase this with skill cards too, but this is just what you come pre-packaged with.
Yeah, so it also gives like a if you look at these cards, like you can look at investigator cards two ways when you're just first starting to look at them and assessing them. The first one is the flavor way, and then there's the actual like function way. And I think they do a good job of painting these things and kind of giving you an understanding on each of them for a new player. So like if you look at Daniela Reyes, the mechanic, you can again look at her stat line where she has the 5 combat, 5 fist, and it immediately puts in your head that, oh, she's probably good at fighting. And that's like the thematic idea, right? Like she is strong, she's capable of combat, and in the game itself that does carry over. 5 fist means that Daniela is going to have a better time fighting compared to the other stats, which we will talk about in greater detail later. But the gist of it is that the 2 on the outside, willpower and agility, brain and foot, are defensive stats. These are stats used most commonly during the Mythos phase, which is when the game is trying to kill you. And then the 2 stats in the middle, intellect and combat, book and fist, these are the offensive stats. There are exceptions to this, and players will tell you there are exceptions, but when it comes down to it, on the most basic level, that's a good way to look at the stat line to get a better understanding of it. So Daniela is a little bit defensive because she has a 3 in her willpower, and she is quite offensive because she has a 5 in her combat. However, she has lower book, so she's less offensive with the book stat and less defensive with her lower foot stat.
Yeah, just to give you another idea of the numbers themselves, 3 is average. It's not bad, it's not good. 2 is not something you want to put much effort into, but you can get some help if you need to. 4s and 5s are very good to build around.
Yeah, 100%. All right, let's go on now to the middle section of the card where we have the traits, ability, and elder sign effect. Traits, if you just bought the new core set, traits aren't gonna matter much, if at all. Traits, for the majority of the game's life, have kind of just appeared in scenario interludes or like scenario setup, and were mostly kind of used for like a thematic nature of it. All cards have traits. Well, not all cards, but again, someone's going to point it out in the comments, so I do have to say it. But traits are just generally a designator to give, again, flavor to these cards, but they also have a function. It's less so for the investigator cards, but if you'll notice when we'll get later on in the series, your stuff like your weapons or like cards that you put into your deck are going to have traits, and those are going to matter more. But generally, on the investigator card, these don't mean much. So there are exceptions if you do have Drowned City. There are a certain type of cards that these traits do matter. But generally, you're not going to need to worry too much about these traits when you're looking at choosing an investigator and understanding an investigator. Next up, we have the ability. And this, I would argue, and I'm sure not many people would disagree, is the most important part of your investigator. Stat lines are easy to adjust. Abilities are unique to investigators. Like, they are the thing that they have with them all the time. Consider your investigator ability a card that you always have in play and are always able to trigger. This is where you can look and understand the most important piece of the puzzle to kind of determine what you want to be doing with that investigator and why you want to be doing it. So with Daniela, she wants to get attacked by enemies, and she wants to fight. If we go back and look at the stat line very quickly, the 5 fist again is kind of pushing this forward. She is here to fight, so that is what you should look at doing. Anything you want to add on this, or?
Not really. One question you should always ask yourself, and you need a little bit of practice, I think, and maybe listening to some videos that we make to talk about the investigators, but do you want to actually have this ability fire off every single round? It has a limit of once per round? Or do you be a little bit more like, I will make use of this when I can? And I think that's different for every investigator. If we're talking about Daniela herself, this ability is very strong. It's basically giving you an extra action. A lot of investigator abilities give you the equivalent of another action, which is great. But there's a cost here, and that is to get attacked. And that's not something you can do all the time without a little bit more help. But it is something to build around a little bit when you take a look at the rest of her cards in the deck.
And I think that this is it's a great thing to think about too, because I think that'll also help determine you as a player, what will dictate how you want to build your deck. There will be a how-to for deck building like later on, because that's a very complicated part of Arkham. So we'll be touching on that later, but that's a great question to ask. And if you look at the investigator card, it also can kind of go with the thing is like, what do I want to do? What does this ability on Daniela Reyes inspire? And how can I make the most of it? That's a great way to start and understand if that investigator is even for you if you want to play her. The last thing we have here in the text part, we're not talking about the flavor text, that's the little italicized text at the bottom there, but we're going to be talking about the Elder Sign effect. This is, if you haven't played Arkham yet, there's a bag of tokens whenever you take a test, and you pull one of those tokens out of the bag to determine the modifier of the test. One of those tokens is the Elder Sign effect. You can look at this as like a critical hit. This is the critical hit that you can roll for your investigator during a test. And this is a kind of a reward when you do roll a critical hit. If you play D&D, it's like rolling a natural 20. That's like the flavor of the Elder Sign effect. So this is Daniela Reyes's critical hit. And every investigator has an Elder Sign effect, and they're usually pretty powerful.
Mm-hmm. So as soon as you draw that token, the modifier is there because this is a symbol token. Usually the tokens have some kind of number on them, but the symbol tokens have special numbers associated with the scenario, but your Elder Sign is specific to the investigator itself. So +1 for Daniela, that's good, means you're probably going to pass the test. And then you also immediately do the effect there, which is deal damage to an enemy at your location. There's no may here, so you do it whether or not you want to. It just happens, but usually that's a good thing.
Yeah. The last important numbers on the Daniela Reyes investigator card we're going to talk about is the health and sanity. This is the amount of damage and horror that an investigator can take before being defeated, whether by are there words to them going insane and getting defeated? I don't know what the other ones are for the damage, but that's kind of this gives you an idea that Daniela Reyes has more health, so she can take more physical damage, but she has lower sanity, so she can take less mental damage before she is defeated.
Yeah, it's actually quite important to keep these numbers in mind as you're playing and as you're building your deck. So keep in mind that most investigators, these two add up to 14, with some exceptions. The Evergreen starter decks that also have come out in Chapter 2 environment, they add up to 15, with the exception of one of them that adds up to 16. But by and large, 14 is what you get, but they get spread in these different amounts. So 7-7 is like a pretty even split. 9-5 is the most disparity you get between the two numbers. So it can be a bit of a problem because you're trying to figure out, how do I not die from horror, even if you can take tons of physical damage.
And like the stat line, this is a good way for you to understand why you want to make certain decisions in your deck. So with Daniela Reyes, you may be more inclined to include more ways to soak your damage, so put it on an asset you control, or alternatively, or I guess your sanity, or alternatively your healing the damage and horror. But she also wants to take a lot of damage because she does want to get attacked. So with all of those together, now we can kind of talk about Daniela Reyes and what the investigator card means. We've been touching on it as it went, but Daniela has 5 fists, so she wants to fight. She wants to deal with enemies. Her ability further dictates this, and then her Elder Sign effect also kind of further just puts like a puncture, like an exclamation point on this idea that she wants to be with enemies at her location because her Elder Sign effect also can deal damage to enemies. She knows how to fight, and she's gonna do really well with it. We talked about Daniela. Why don't we talk about some of the other investigators? I have a few other cards here. We can start from scratch. So, Joe Diamond, the private investigator. His class is the Seeker class, so we already see a difference here between Daniela and Joe, where this is when, again, the classes, there's 5 of them, and honestly, how to understand the classes probably would be a good video in this series as well if we want to get very basic. But Joe is a Seeker, which means he's going to have the Seeker strengths and weaknesses more often than the Guardian strengths and weaknesses until we look at the back part of his card, because as Daniel said earlier, all investigators kind of have their things that make them strong and weak, and they also sometimes dip into other classes. But Daniel, most importantly, let's jump to the stat line. What does the stat line say about Joe?
Well, he's got 2 numbers, basically. He's got 2 2s and 2 4s, which means the 2 4s, as we talked about a second ago, are very proactive offensive stats. So he's good at doing investigations using his intellect and also fighting. So what are you fighting with? Again, that's the card access. Don't worry about that. But you have basically really good ways of pushing the game forward, and then the game is going to push you a little bit too, because your defensive numbers, the willpower and agility, they're on the low side. So yeah, it's interesting to play him with that kind of approach.
Yeah, so to go with what Daniel said earlier as well, which is that because of there's these 2 in these stats, it's very hard for you to build around these or depend on these stats. But because they are your defensive stats, it's going to be the ways that you're going to want to at least have some sort of plan on keeping yourself safe. You don't want to be completely defenses down, because if we look at his health and sanity, he does have 7 and 7, which is more sanity than Daniela, but less health. So he has that average number of the 14 that Daniel mentioned, but that will run away pretty quick. You'll lose out on that pretty quickly if you just go complete defensive down. So the way that these stat lines can help dictate your initial deck building decisions can be very helpful. So you can see with Joe, I have to work less for my offensive stats. I can do both of them, but I'm completely shields down, so I should have some sort of plan to deal with that.
And you can't really avoid this. The game is really good at making you take tests, right? In the Mythos phase especially, you're just forced to do this. For the offensive stats, you just need to do this anyway. So it's not something that you can just focus on one number and ignore all the rest.
Yeah. There is a question in chat that I think is from YouTube that's really good. What are the best ways to increase your player sanity and health levels? And that's a great question for both Joe and Daniela. And the answer to that is healing. So like healing damage in a horror that you have on your investigator, or soaking the damage in horror, which is most commonly done through assets that you have in play. An example of this is is it called Resilience? The guy pouring the alcohol on himself? Is that that one? That just soaks for 2 and 2. 2 damage, 2 horror. So that is an example of how to increase your sanity and health levels in this game, or healing the damage and horror off of you. Seeker is very good horror healing. Guardian has pretty good damage healing right now, so you can kind of lean into those things as well. What does Joe's ability say about him?
Well, his ability is a reaction. After you successfully investigate, draw 1 card once per round. We saw this limit once per round for Daniela. This one is something that doesn't cost you anything. So you just get an extra card after you successfully investigate. So I asked before, do you want to get attacked every round to use Danielle's ability? Maybe, maybe not. For Joe, the answer is yes. You're leaving some value on the table if you are not using his ability to draw some extra cards. Card games really want you to have cards, so this is a great way to do it.
Yeah, and his Elder Sign effect is if you succeed, draw 1 card and gain 1 resource. Also very easy to understand, and also very good, because that's essentially just like an upkeep phase in the game, gain an extra card and resource, which is really, really nice. And again, Elder Sign effects, you can't really like build around them, but it's just like a nice thing to kind of see if it further pushes a direction that you want to go. All right, let's look at another investigator. Our good friend Dexter Drake. 5 willpower, 2 book, 2 fist, 3 foot. Daniel, what does this say about Dexter?
So it's the opposite of Joe, right? Not exactly the balanced like 4 willpower, 4 agility, but it's close. You get those 2 numbers adding up to 8. They're good. And then the offensive stats are terrible. So you might say, how do I win the game with just defensive stats? Well, Dexter Drake has access to both Mystic and rogue cards that proactively use those two stats to get things done, to fight and to get clues. So he's actually in a very, very nice spot. But we talked about how the investigator card is basically like a card that's always in play. You start with it. Dexter needs to find other things and play other things in order to make those stats do anything.
Yeah. So this is what I was mentioning earlier, that like the basic way to look at these stats is that the two outside are defensive and the two interiors are offensive. Classes can change this, so this is why the classes matter in this game. Each class has strengths and weaknesses, and the Mystic and Rogues are that they're able to use those stats, and the weakness is that without those cards that use those stats, they're kind of in a little bit of a pickle. So you know then immediately with Dexter Drake is that you cannot play the same game that you would have with Joe Diamond or Daniela Reyes, because those are asking this stat line immediately when you don't consider anything else is already asking for a different thing from you. So that's something that you need to be aware of if you do want to play Dexter Drake. Luckily, in the core set, there's some great options that are just there for you. You don't need to think too hard. They're kind of just the assets that can work with it, but as you get a bigger and bigger card pool, you're going to have to make more decisions and find the best thing for the investigator. But without that, that's getting a bit ahead of ourselves. Dexter Drake is just that you need to have a plan. How can I use this 5 brain offensively as opposed to just having a high stat defensively? His reaction ability on the text is after you play an asset, either return another non-story asset you control to your hand or play a different asset from your hand, paying its cost. Like how Joe dictates that he wants to investigate, Daniela dictates that she wants to fight, Dexter's actually doesn't really dictate you a direction that you want to go. But what it does give you is that you want to maybe look at playing assets. That's kind of what the thing is here. And luckily, most of the things that are there to use your willpower, to use your agility, require assets. So it kind of is just like a perfect storm where you're able to get more value out of these things you want to play. So one thing, if we just look at these guys in a vacuum, Dexter Drake kind of tells you, I want to play more assets than the other two. This is not necessarily like the only way to play it, right? Like you could play a high asset deck with Daniela and Joe. But Dexter's ability in a vacuum kind of says, ooh, what kind of synergy can I get from the assets that I want to play? And it changes how Dexter Drake might play to Marie Lambeau if you do have the Investigator starter decks as well.
Yeah, nothing to add there.
Perfect. Then let's just talk on his little Elder Sign quickly. You may return a non-story asset or location to its owner's hand. Again, the asset synergy, they're kind of hammering down on that, and it's really nice to kind of just have like a simple value plan that works from top to bottom. 6/8 for the soak, for 6/8 for the health and the sanity. Just again, average your numbers, not as extreme as Daniela's 5/8, sorry 5/9, and the 5 willpower means that you're actually pretty well protected on the sanity side of things,
and potentially even the health. Some of the new treacheries actually let you test your willpower to avoid taking damage.
Yep. All right, let's do something we haven't done yet, because Dexter Drake's the last guy we're talking about here. Let's flip Dexter over. Let's look at the back side of the card. So we've looked at the fronts for a bit, so now let's kind of just like talk about what these numbers and all these words on the back mean. These ones are not as necessary for the game itself, but they are most important for before your first play and between each scenario that you play. So, Daniel, this is the most obvious question I've ever asked for Arkham Horror. What's deck size?
Actually, I think it's less obvious. It's the base number of cards you get to include. But we should also mention what doesn't count towards this 30. So you're also going to see in a little bit more about the deck building requirements, but the 30 cards are just the player cards that you get to choose to include in his deck. His signature card, his basic weakness, his signature weakness, his basic weakness, those don't count towards the 30, and neither do any permanent cards that you will include in the deck as well. It's a common misconception. Those are just like separate. Your deck size is always going to be 30 unless you start increasing it in some other ways. Story assets that you earn through campaign also don't count.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like it's the 30 cards that you have a choice that you shuffle in your deck. So it's like everything that you have a choice of and you shuffle at the start. This can be increased or decreased depending on what how big your card pool is and the cards you have available to yourself. But these are like the 30 cards that you have a choice of when you're first building your deck, and also when upgrading you can only have 30 cards in your deck. So if you upgrade a card, you have to take a card out if it's a, you know, that's just you have to follow that 30 requirement. Deck building options. This is what Daniel was alluding to with Daniela and Joe. And also with Dexter. But Dexter can play Mystic cards 0 to 5, Rogue cards 0 to 2, and Neutral cards 0 to 5. There are 6 levels for each class of card. There is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And these are, as they get higher level, become stronger cards. What this means is that Dexter can play the highest, strongest, most powerful Mystic cards, but he can also play to the weak to like the mid-level, the lower mid-level power of the Rogue cards. This is not like the most like factual way to look at it, but that's just kind of like the general idea behind it, is that he's a very good Mystic, he's an alright Rogue, and he's not a Guardian, a Seeker, or a Survivor. He can't play any of those cards in his deck. So this is where the class matters. And also how the Investigator's class on the start is generally how you can determine what that Investigator's strength is. So that's what is like Dexter is a Mystic on the front, so he can play Mystic 0 to 5. This is where there's a lot of customization for these Investigators, where you can kind of like explore their off-class pool to see what it wants. And now you know when someone says off-class, it means the class of cards that they can get that are not the Investigator's main class, which is usually the class on the front.
Yeah, the other thing to mention here is that when you're first starting out in a campaign, all you have are level 0 cards in your deck. The deck building options are just what makes a legal deck. But as far as the campaign goes, you have to start with just level 0 cards. When you earn experience, now you can start purchasing the level 1 through 5 cards and put them in your deck. True for neutral as well. So yeah, I sometimes see people who get confused. They see a deck list up somewhere that has, you know, level 3 or 5 cards in it. That's kind of aspirational, that eventually they can afford to buy those cards into their deck. But at the level 0, you're actually kind of equally a Rogue and a Mystic, right? Because you have just access to level 0 from each.
Yeah, and this is kind of where the thematic part of it comes back, where the idea is that as you upgrade and get stronger, Dexter has more Mystic knowledge, so that's why he gets stronger with that, but he's still a Rogue at heart. So like that's kind of like the level 0 deck is where you start, but then you level up, but you're like hyper-focused on your main class. That's where your most of your power is. The last thing we have to look at here are the deck building requirements. As they say, do not count towards deck size, as Daniel mentioned earlier. This is for my next trick, the Necronomicon, and 1 random basic weakness. These are the signatures, the signature weakness, the signature card, and then the random basic weakness. These are Dexter's signatures that we're mentioning here, but we're going to talk about these in a later video, understanding signatures and weaknesses and all that. They kind of continue to push you in a direction with your Investigator, where when you're looking at what do I want to do with my Investigator, you should look at the front of the Investigator card, the back, and their signatures, because they kind of show you another strength and another weakness. So, I mean, literally for the weakness part. But Dexter's signature says you can find spells or items, which is really good. Like, they have to be assets as well. So, like, it's pushing down this idea of using assets. And the Necronomicon stops you from playing or trigger ability on assets you control. So then you need to now be like, okay, so I need assets, but I can stop being played assets. How can I beat the Necronomicon? This is all kind of like the perfect storm for understanding the Investigator card, front, back, and signatures.
Yeah. One last thing I'd like to sort of mention. Some more advanced players might ignore lots of parts of the Investigator card, because you can say, I'm going to play kind of a weird Dexter Drake who doesn't care about assets. You can do this because deck building is really open. However, you're kind of leaving some value on the table, and you should know what you're doing if that's the case. If you're a new player, look at these as a direction, as some guidance from the designers about how you should play this deck, and not just have, 30 of your favorite cards, but some look for synergy, look for things that work together well, and you'll have a better time.
100%. I couldn't have said it better. So, Hopefully this has helped you have a better grasp on reading and understanding your investigator card. We'll be back for another episode of the How To series soon, focusing on weaknesses and how to understand them, because it's a whole different thing all in of itself. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to both Playing Board Games and Quick Learner for more Learn to Play content, and subscribe to More Playing Board Games, which is another channel that we have on here, where if you want some Arkham and board game gameplay in the future. Thanks for joining me, Daniel. As always, it's a pleasure to talk Arkham with you, especially when it comes to guiding new players. If you want to support the channel, you can like, comment, subscribe, or you can join the Patreon. I guess the names are over here, which is going above and beyond. Would be much appreciated if you do want to do that. But in the meantime, enjoy playing Arkham, try exploring investigators, and most importantly, the thing I want to try to hammer home in every one of these how to play videos is don't be afraid to make mistakes. Try things out. If they don't work, you will have to learn that some way, and that might be doing it in action is the best way to learn it. Lose Arkham, win Arkham. The one will lead to the other, and then it'll lead back. We have won and lost a lot of Arkham as we've played, and we keep trying things out to become better, so that's the best advice I can give to you as a new player. Try it out! Don't be afraid. Thanks for watching, and as always, GG's.